Again, thank you, David H, for this amazing video.
Thanks for joining us, David. It's great to see you. And thanks for those really interesting reflections on mapping the sacred, especially accompanied by those beautiful, beautiful, beautiful paintings done by Wang Chuck. This is a contribution by Lyli Zeng, and Lily completed her doctorate, her PhD from Yale University's School of Forestry and Environmental Studies in partnership with the New York Botanical Garden. I don't believe Lily has been able to join us in person today, but her doctoral research was done in partnership with communities of the Dai ethnic minority group in Yunnan, China, in the Xishuangbanna Dai Autonomous Prefecture. And she worked with the Dai people to understand the importance of their sacred natural sites, which are often referred to as holy hills. So she's done some very interesting work looking at the nature of the sacred within Dai communities and how that affects their relationship with natural resources in the broader landscape. So, and it's also worth noting that, like David, Lily is also a National Geographic explorer. And at the moment, she is working for the government of Canada as a social scientist.
Hello, my name is Lyli Zeng, and I will be presenting on my doctoral work from Yale School of the Environment and the New York Botanical Garden. I am so thrilled for the opportunity today to share my research on sacred groves called Holy Hills in Xishuangbanna in southwest China. So as you all know, sacred groves are forests protected by communities, many of which are indigenous, for religious reasons. They're found around the world, and these sacred groves have been receiving increasing attention from environmental advocates for their potential to balance conservation goals with social benefits for local communities. Yet scholars have observed that conservationists often tend to assume the preservation of a static brand of indigenous culture, when in reality, indigenous peoples have long negotiated the meanings of sacred nature and maintenance of sacred groves with other forms of land use that are shaped by state and market pressures. Identity and sacred nature deserve ongoing discussion in conservation because they provide frameworks for negotiating people-environmental interactions, the results of which produce tangible ecological and political consequences. During my fieldwork in Xishuangbanna Autonomous Prefecture in Yunnan Province, China, I noticed that cultural identity for indigenous, or in China, ethnic minority, Dai people is closely tied to protecting ancestral spirits in sacred groves called holy hills. The recent promotion of holy hills by conservationists tends to paint them as pristine and timeless relics of ancient forest guarded by ethnic minority cultures vulnerable to change and modernity. At the same time, Dai people are increasingly portrayed as the often unreliable protectors of disappearing but crucial knowledge for harmonious people-nature relationships. Thus, in addition to the attention they receive from international conservationists, holy hills and Dai people have become objects of interest to the Chinese state as part of national policies for environmental protection and sustainable development. In the mid-2000s, the Chinese government began emphasizing the ecological civilization, also known as eco-civilization or Sentai Wenming, as a national policy priority for environmental protection and sustainable development. In recent promotions of eco-civilization, the Chinese government emphasizes that it is important to conserve ethnic minority culture because their traditional practices have been protecting the environment naturally. This is particularly interesting in Xishuangbanna, for the focus on rural landscapes and traditional practices introduces a rhetoric for renewed government attention in ethnic minority communities. Today, my talk covers a very brief history of Dai people and holy hills in Xishuangbanna, as well as their entanglements with the Chinese government in light of state interest in ethnic minority cultures, environmental protection, and eco-civilization. For those of you who are new to this part of the world, Xishuangbanna is a prefecture in Yunnan province on the border of Laos and Myanmar, and it contains the world's northernmost tropical rainforest and China's richest concentration of biodiversity. There's also high cultural diversity. China overall is 92% ethnically Han, but in Xishuangbanna, 75% of people are non-Han or ethnic minorities, of which the most populous are the Dai with whom I work. This region is beautiful, as you can see, but the lowland forest was decimated as it was converted to rubber monoculture. And so you can see here from the satellite imagery that from 1976 to 2003, 67% of lowland forest, which is shown in lime green on the map, was replaced by rubber, which is shown in the red. The only remaining forest fragments outside nature reserves are holy hills protected by Dai communities for religious reasons. Dai people have been Buddhist since Buddhism was introduced around 700 AD. So you can see in this drawing, there's a little temple in red in this Dai village. But holy hills predate Buddhism as a form of nature and ancestor worship. So you can see a holy hill rising off to the side on the right. The majority of Dai people today still practice a syncretic form of Buddhism and polytheistic animism. Dai people still protect holy hills. So for instance, no cutting trees, because even though they subscribe to Buddhist beliefs of reincarnation, they still need protection from the holy hill spirits in this life. Holy hills are called Nong, meaning God forest in Dai language, because they are home to spirits called Yobura, whereas other forests are called Bamailong. There were previously over 1,000 holy hills in Xishuangbanna, but several were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution in the 1970s. Since the 1980s, many holy hills have been converted to rubber plantations. Today, less than 250 remain. The remaining holy hills have been documented to contain rare species and ecosystems underrepresented in protected area networks. Here we can see one of the holy hills I study silhouetted behind a Dai village, and you can see here how it's an island of threatened rainforest rising out of a sea of rubber. So that flatness all around this holy hill is a uniform canopy of rubber plantation. Besides their conservation potential, we also need to consider that there are competing interests at play in holy hills. On one hand, it's understood in Dai culture that maintaining holy hills improves community well-being by appeasing ancestor spirits. On the other hand, converting holy hills for increased rubber production improves material security and Dai social standing in Chinese society. On top of this, holy hills are potential sites for eco and ethnic tourism, as well as important symbols of ethnic minority culture and conservation for the Chinese government in new environmental policy. I've seen many holy hills like this with towering trees to fit the ideal of pristine forest remnants surrounded by rubber. But I've also seen holy hills that do not fit this mold, such as at the village of Manlang. Manlang's holy hill was cut down and planted with commercial Senecia mia firewood trees during the Cultural Revolution in the 1970s. During this time, the Chinese state under Mao Zedong sought to destroy religion, so all spirituality and other forms of cultural expression were destroyed or suppressed, often with violence. When policies changed in the 1980s, the village of Manlang recreated their sacred grove by consecrating a patch of land and letting the trees go back. With all the emphasis in conservation on preserving forest, what was remarkable here was that after a forest was destroyed, it could be resurrected through this community connection with the sacred. When I asked for permission to enter Manlang's holy hill to conduct botanical surveys, villagers were initially very reluctant. As you can see, their sign here says 神山禁地禁止参观, which means sacred land, entries forbidden. Moreover, women are traditionally forbidden to enter holy hills. However, Manlang residents ultimately allowed my botanical surveys in return for providing tree seedlings to help restore their holy hill, and I became the first and only female ever to set foot in this particular holy hill. To my great surprise, Manlang's village council made plans to cut certain trees in the holy hill as part of restoration. I was surprised at this village decision because the prohibition against felling trees is central to holy hill management, so I had assumed that restoration would simply involve planting seedlings beneath existing trees. But the village and holy hill spirit were evidently more open-minded. The Holy Hill restoration was an event for the whole community to come together and make history. There was at least one man from each of Menlang's 60 households. One 20-year-old man proudly told me, "I planted 2 trees here. I can show my son exactly which trees I planted. And when I am old, I can look at the big trees in the Holy Hill that I planted, and I can tell my children and grandchildren." The restoration of their Holy Hill is very significant for Menlang as an expression of community identity. This village has had little opportunity to do so before because its landscape had been so strongly shaped by state powers. In the 1960s and 70s, land was collectivized and sacred spaces were destroyed. In the 1980s, nature reserves were created surrounding Menlang, and this restricted land available to community members for agriculture. In the present day, the state still restricts the use of certain forests, and the state has designated Menlang as a heritage village, so community members cannot build modern concrete houses like we see in other villages. Menlang's Holy Hill is one of the few landscapes over which the community has decision-making power, which was exercised through the restoration. Though Menlang had outside help from me, the community was in control of the process. For instance, picking what day the Holy Hill spirit wanted for planting and which trees to cut down. In removing what they called bad trees, the Senecio firewood trees that had been previously imposed by the state, community members were excising that part of the past and reconnecting with a pre-Cultural Revolution identity to promote community cohesion and shape their own future. As we all know, of course, this is really important because identity can be wrapped up in politics in many ways. So stepping back a bit, ethnic minorities in China are often thought of as indigenous groups by researchers and laypeople from outside China. While these categorizations often affect the same individuals, the political contexts of each term are nuanced in different ways. China's central government invested substantial effort and resources in a top-down mission of categorizing ethnic minorities according to socialist ideas of ethnic differences, but it resisted the notion that indigenous groups existed in China. The Chinese government was supportive of indigenous rights movements in other countries because it saw indigeneity as a relevant issue in countries that had been settled by Europeans. But it argued there were no indigenous groups in China because everybody in China was equally Chinese. Transnational debates surrounding indigenous rights have often focused on issues such as legal treaties or historical precedents, none of which have gained much traction in China's political spheres. Instead, the concept of indigeneity was introduced to China on the heels of environmentalism. So environmental protection is the framework in which indigenous peoples are understood, as Michael Hathaway describes beautifully in his book, Environmental Winds. In China, this new attitude towards indigenous conservation is largely thanks to the efforts of a small group of scholars, most notably Peisenji, the father of Chinese ethnobotany. So he significantly influenced the discourse surrounding human-nature relationships in Yunnan by connecting that with international interest in biological diversity and its intersection with cultural diversity. One important way in which he accomplished this feat was through his writings on Dai sacred forests, which he henceforth christened Holy Hills, as we call them now for English readers. Pei presented sacred forests in Yunnan as examples of indigenous conservation, contradicting standard Han depictions of minorities as primitive peoples in need of state guidance for social development. Instead of the common view that these sacred groves were the products of backwardness and superstition, he framed the knowledge and practices of ethnic minorities as models for conservation and sustainability. Pei treated the study of ethnic minorities and their landscapes with the respected attitude and language of science, studying the floristic composition of holy hills by documenting plant species with their Latin taxonomic names and making a scientific argument for the ecological importance of holy hills. His rebranding of holy hills in environmental terms has successfully cast holy hills as sites of interest to conservation scientists and Xishuangbanna National Nature Reserve. Thus, environmental concerns have become intricately connected to holy hills. One new way in which environmental concerns and holy hills have been connected is through ecotourism. Many Dai villages have been developed for tourists, and many more Dai villages are hoping to be selected by tourist companies to be developed next. Many locals see tourism as an excellent livelihood opportunity, as well as a way to preserve their culture. For instance, at the Dai village of Mayanguang, community members voted to lease their holy hill for ecotourism, and they signed a 50-year lease with a private tourism company on October 20th, 2015. And the signing of that leasing document is what you see in this photo right now. Village leadership hoped that in addition to providing income, there would be the added benefit of protecting their holy hill. In recent years, Mayanguang's holy hill had been degraded by local villagers who had harvested several large trees to sell for timber. And because the tourism company planned to erect a wall surrounding the holy hill and to employ a full-time security guard, some villagers believed this would help preserve their holy hill. Moreover, tourism would allow the holy hill to provide income and remain financially relevant to villagers who are becoming increasingly reliant on money rather than subsistence agriculture for food. In this way, there would be reduced benefits for villagers sneaking in to cut trees, for tourism would be giving monetary values to trees that are alive rather than cut down and sold as timber. However, external authority figures did not share this view that ecotourism would help protect Mayanguang's holy hill. Prior to signing the holy hill lease, the vice mayor of Mayanguang's township refused to support Mayanguang's local village leadership in pursuing tourism development of the holy hill, claiming that it would harm the forest ecosystem. Despite the fact that the government and NGOs have supported many similar projects in the past, several government employees and conservation researchers that I spoke to were immediately critical of Mayanguang's decision to lease their holy hill, claiming that the locals don't know to protect the environment because they just want money. Their culture and religion are fading. So despite leasing the holy hill successfully, the project here was ultimately blocked in early 2017 by local government because of concerns about tourism development causing the ecological degradation of the holy hill. So, in spite of the fact that this holy hill had been protected by Mayanguang's community members for many generations, the government co-opted the role of environmental caretaker and removed it from Mayanguang villagers, much to the dismay of many local community members. Thus, though the Chinese state is ostensibly supportive of ethnic minority traditions in the eco-civilization rhetoric, it does not trust ethnic minority communities to maintain their own practices. Nevertheless, Dai communities continue to protect their holy hills and honor the Diobara spirits that live inside. So these Diobara spirits exist not only in holy hills, but also in Dai homes. Making a home is a deeply spiritual practice for Dai people, for without the spirit's blessing, a house cannot become a family's home. The Dai believe that after death, the head of the household is transformed into a house spirit, a Diobara, which lives inside the timber columns of the house. Diobara are honored on a little altar that people keep in their house, and Dai people honor their ancestry and reinforce kinship through everyday practice, such as leaving a regular offering of food on the altar. Dai people believe that holy hills are the home of Diobara spirits, spirits of leaders who founded a community, or otherwise important historical figures with many deeds to their name. The ritual of building a new house acts as a microcosm that confirms the relationships between the household, Dai society, nature, and spirits. The main column of the house is an important symbolic feature of parallel structures at different scales, because you have an upright wooden pole, a single harvested tree in which a spirit lives. That is the microcosm of the forest from which it came, in which dwell many spirits. The house column is the home of an ancestral house spirit, and the Holy Hill Forest is the home of an ancestral village spirit. The house spirit maintains peace and harmony within the household, and the Holy Hill spirit maintains peace and harmony in the community, and spirits of larger territories maintain peace in larger territories. And so some altars for spirits that are from larger territories here. And in this way, the Dai home is a microcosm of the Holy Hill, larger spirits, and social order. But contemporary Dai houses are increasingly transitioning away from wood to concrete. In new housing designs, occasionally the main support columns as structural features are eliminated. However, the altars for the Diobrachen are not lost in the concrete houses. As you can see here, how they're incorporated into newly built homes. And so that's just on the left side of the flowery wall. To many Dai people, a new concrete home is a status symbol. Others, of course, are seeing the value of older wooden homes that look more traditional, for instance, to please tourists. The government also has clear ideas of how Dai houses should look to reflect Dai culture. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the government designated Manlang as a heritage village where the construction of wooden homes is not allowed. These externally determined rules are typically reinforced by tourism companies managing heritage villages, which further concentrates power away from local communities. In some instances, even the very design of a traditional Dai village has been removed from Dai people. In 2017, as part of rural development programs emphasized in eco-civilization, government officials began designing traditional ethnic villages to protect Dai traditions, but included no input from Dai people. Moreover, the government has invested significant amounts of monies to make traditional Dai villages more orderly by correcting the winding crooked roads that currently exist in most villages and building more so-called traditional Dai wooden houses along straight paths. It is the very embodiment of the state making ethnic minorities legible, using James Scott's favorite term, with their culture defined by the state and neatly laid out in tidy rows of identical so-called traditional houses. So wrapping up my talk today, the government is striving towards its vision of the eco-civilization, and as part of that vision, it produces a narrative about the importance of ethnic minority traditions and environmental protection. Because this provides political potency to the production of ethnic minority identity, the state has a vested interest in shaping Dai identity, and it does so by exacting influence at important cultural centers such as holy hills and Dai homes. But Dai identity is resilient. There are power struggles and competing narratives in the production of Dai identity, and it has survived many similarly significant events in history, including the conversion to Buddhism around 700 AD. And now Buddhism is a huge part of Dai identity, as you can see here with the stupa ritual, as well as changes in political structure when Xishuangbanna was subsumed into the People's Republic of China and religious purging during the Cultural Revolution. Through cultural centers such as holy hills, and by constantly reinterpreting the past in light of the present, Dai people maintain ongoing connections to the past, present, and future Dai communities. In light of new environmental concerns and national policies, Dai are not passive subjects. They are actively shaping alternative futures for themselves and appropriating resources for their own culturally specific needs. And so I acknowledge the institutions that have supported and funded me. If you'd like to discuss further or have questions, please feel free to reach out to me at the email below, and I look forward to connecting. Thank you so much for your time and attention today.
Yeah, thank you, Lily, for that wonderful contribution about sacred sites and the complications with conservation, tourism, and ethnic identity. So we have arrived at our last contribution of the day.